January 2021 felt like a paused screen. The world had slowed down, but my life was still slipping. I had dropped out of community college the month before because I could not keep up with the fees or the gas, or the lie that I was still going somewhere. My car started only if I turned the key just right and waited through the clicking. I slept on a friend's couch with my shoes lined up under a coffee table like a reminder that I was temporary. I carried everything I owned in 2 duffel bags and kept them zipped in case I had to leave fast. I met her online while scrolling through listings that blurred work and guidance. The site called itself Mentorship with Benefits, which sounded like advice mixed with support. The profiles were polished and careful. No promises, no explicit photos, no crude language. She stood out because she was specific. Her bio talked about stability, structure, accountability. She said she helped people get back on track. She said she believed in oversight. She said independence was earned through consistency. I filled out a long form and sent it without thinking. She replied within the hour. The first payment came 2 days later. She covered my phone bill without asking for anything except a copy of the invoice. Then my car insurance. Then a small weekly transfer labeled reimbursement. It was not framed as payment. It was framed as support. Each step felt reasonable. Each step came with a condition that sounded like advice. She chose the apartment. She said it would help me focus. It was in Irvine, inside a gated complex near a golf course. The buildings were pale and identical. The lawns were clipped so evenly they looked fake. The air smelled like fertilizer and distant sprinklers. The place was quiet in a way that felt designed. At night there were no voices, no traffic, only the hum of air systems and the occasional bark of a dog that was quickly pulled inside. The unit was on the 3rd floor. 1 bedroom, white walls, new appliances. The lease was not in my name. She said that was easier. She said it removed pressure. I moved in with my duffel bags and lined them up in the closet. The windows faced the parking lot and a strip of road that curved toward the main exit. From the balcony, I could see the edge of the golf course, the grass darker there, almost black at night. The money came every Friday morning. The amount never changed. It arrived down to the cent. No explanation, no message. If I spent less 1 week, the next payment did not adjust. It was not a salary. It felt like a ration. I learned to plan around it without realizing I was doing that. She never visited. She never asked for photos. She never asked about my body. People assume things when they hear about arrangements like that. This was not that. There was no flirting. There was no affection. There was no warmth. There was oversight. She knew things before I told her. The first time, I brushed it off. I had stayed out late with my friend, driving around because neither of us wanted to go back to our places. The next morning, before I mentioned it, she sent a message asking if everything was okay since I had come home after midnight. I assumed my phone tracked me. I checked the settings and turned off what I could. Then she asked why I had skipped an online class. I had logged in, muted it, and fallen asleep. I had not told anyone. I assumed maybe the school shared attendance data. I told myself it was fine. The moment that stuck with me came a week later. She asked why I had taken the stairs instead of the elevator that morning. I had taken the stairs because the elevator smelled like cleaning chemicals and made my head hurt. I had not mentioned it. There was no reason for her to know. I stood in the kitchen staring at my phone while the refrigerator buzzed. I told myself she guessed. I told myself it was coincidence. Around that time I noticed the SUV. It was black, older, with tinted windows. It parked across the street outside the gate, most nights around 11. It never entered the complex. It sat with its engine off. By sunrise it was gone. I started checking for it without meaning to. I would step onto the balcony and look down the road. Some nights it was not there, and I felt relief that surprised me. Other nights it was, and I felt watched even though I could not see anyone inside. The apartment felt smaller as weeks passed. The silence pressed in. I became aware of small sounds. The click of the thermostat. The faint buzz behind the walls. The soft thud of something heavy moving above me at the same time every night, even though I knew the unit above mine was empty. I started sleeping with the bathroom light on because the bedroom felt too dark. I began to notice devices I had not paid attention to before. A smoke detector above the kitchen that blinked once every 30 seconds. A small white box near the ceiling in the hallway that I assumed was part of the alarm system. The router she had provided sat on the shelf with no brand name on it. It had no visible buttons except reset, which I did not press. I tried to push back in small ways. I stayed out later than usual. I left my phone at home once and walked to the golf course fence just to see if anything happened. That night she asked if I had enjoyed the walk. She said fresh air was good for routine. I stopped experimenting after that. The control was not loud. It was quiet and constant. The rules were implied. Stay in the apartment. Keep a schedule. Do not create gaps. The money made it possible. The money made it necessary. My old friend stopped answering texts when I stopped visiting. The couch was no longer an option. The apartment became the only place I could land. I decided to leave in early March. I told myself I would pack in the morning, drive until the car died, and figure it out. I waited until a Friday after the deposit cleared. I put my bags in the trunk and pulled out of the complex before noon. I felt light for the first time in months. The car stalled at the gas station less than a mile away. I swiped my debit card and the machine declined it. I tried again. Declined. I checked my balance on my phone. It showed 0. Not low. 0. No pending charges. No overdraft. Just empty. I sat in the car with the engine off and the smell of gasoline heavy in the air. My phone buzzed with a notification. The weekly transfer had been reversed. The memo field was blank. I realized then that the money had never been mine. It had been permission. I went back to the apartment because I had nowhere else to go. The gate opened for me without delay. The unit door unlocked. Inside, nothing had changed. My things were where I left them. The silence felt thicker. That night the SUV parked closer. It sat just beyond the gate, angled toward my building. I watched it from the balcony until my eyes hurt. No lights came on. No doors opened. It was there until morning. I started looking for exits that did not involve leaving. I unplugged the router. The internet died immediately. My phone lost signal inside the apartment. I plugged it back in. I tried covering the small white box in the hallway with a towel. The towel slid off by morning. I checked the lease paperwork that sat in a drawer. It listed a property management company I could not find online. The address traced back to a mailbox service. I began documenting everything on paper. Dates, times, amounts, the way the smoke detector blinked, the nights the SUV appeared. I hid the notebook inside the lining of my duffel bag. Writing made me feel less invisible. The realization came slowly, and then all at once. She was not supporting me. She was testing a system. I was a variable. The apartment was a controlled environment. My movements were data. The money was a leash. The oversight was the point. I stopped responding to messages. I stayed inside. I slept on the couch with my shoes on. After 3 days without contact, the power flickered at exactly 9 in the evening. It went out for 5 minutes and came back on. The message that followed said consistency was important for safety. I did not sleep that night. At dawn I packed again. I left the notebook behind on purpose. I wanted to see if it mattered. I took the stairs. I walked past the gate before it could open. The SUV was parked across the street. This time the engine was running. I did not go to the car. I walked the opposite direction, toward the golf course, toward open space. I cut through the grass and over a low fence. I kept walking until my legs burned. I did not look back. I spent the next week in shelters and borrowed rooms. My phone stopped working 2 days after I left. I bought a cheap replacement with cash. I changed numbers. I closed accounts. I slept lightly. Months later, I found an article about a private research firm in Orange County that specialized in behavioral compliance systems. They had lost a lawsuit over unlicensed monitoring in residential properties. The details were vague. No names were listed. One line mentioned a pilot program involving voluntary participants receiving financial support in exchange for residency and routine adherence. I understood then why the money had been exact, why the apartment had been chosen, why the oversight had felt so calm. I was never meant to stay. I was meant to be measured. When I stopped fitting the pattern, the system closed around me. I am stable now. I rent a room in a place with thin walls and loud neighbors. My car is gone. My life is smaller, but it is mine. I still wake up some nights expecting silence and find noise instead. I still check for black SUVs without meaning to. The ending is not dramatic. No one came for me. No confrontation happened. The control ended because I stepped outside the environment that made it possible. That was the only exit they could not close. I was 19 that summer and counting days by how little sleep I got. My parents' house felt smaller each week. The walls held heat. The rules pressed in. I needed out, and I needed it fast. When she found me online, it felt like luck. She did not call herself anything crude. She used a cleaner word that sounded cultured and safe. She said she enjoyed helping young men with potential. She said she liked watching people become more than they were. I read it as ego and charity mixed together. I did not read it as control. The first money arrived before I asked for it. It showed up with a note that talked about responsibility and trust. I did not meet her in daylight. She set the terms early without arguing. Every time we met, it was after midnight. The places were always wrong for meeting anyone. Closed diners with chairs stacked upside down. Empty marinas where the water knocked against pylons and the lights buzzed. Parking garages under office buildings where the air smelled like oil and wet concrete. She chose places where no one lingered and where cameras watched from fixed angles. I never described her out loud to anyone because that felt like crossing a line. In my head she stayed vague. She wore plain clothes. Her hair changed styles. Her face did not stick in memory the way faces usually do. What stuck was the way she planned. She arrived early. She parked where she could see every entrance. She always knew if someone else was nearby before I did. She never asked me to sit close. She never touched me. She never raised her voice. The calm was steady and heavy. She paid for meals even when the kitchen was closed and the cook was a single tired man wiping counters. She paid for gas. She paid for the small things that made me feel like I could leave home soon. Each payment came with nothing attached in words. The attachment lived elsewhere. It lived in what she asked me to send later. At first it was harmless. Pictures that did not show my face. My hands against a white wall. My shoes on a floor. The back of my neck with my hair pulled aside. The inside of my mouth with my tongue lifted. I told myself it was some harmless quirk. I told myself people had stranger tastes. I told myself money had always come from places I did not want to examine too closely. I took the photos with my phone and felt a small drop in my stomach each time I hit send. The feeling passed fast when the payment came through. The requests changed in small steps. She asked for angles. She asked for light. She asked for clean nails. She asked me to stand barefoot on dirt and send a picture after. I asked why in a short message. She sent money instead of an answer. The money was more than before. I went to a patch of ground behind the house where the grass died near the fence. The dirt was warm and dry. I washed my feet after. I still felt grit under my toes when I lay in bed. I stopped talking about her to myself as a person and started thinking of her as a system. Messages came at certain hours. Payments followed certain files. Meetings happened only when the moon was high and the streets were thin. She never asked me to say anything about my life. She already seemed to know it. She knew when I worked late. She knew when my parents were out. She knew when I was sick before I mentioned it. When I woke up at night and checked my phone, there was often a message waiting, sent minutes before I stirred. I blamed coincidence because the other option felt stupid and dramatic. I began to notice patterns in the places she chose. The closed diner had a side window that reflected the parking lot like a mirror. The marina had a single bench that faced the ramp and the water. The garage had pillars that broke sight lines into clean slices. She sat where she could see and not be seen. When I shifted, she noticed. When I left early once because my stomach hurt, the next payment arrived smaller. No explanation. Just a number that told me to be careful. I moved my things slowly, a box at a time into the trunk of my car. I started looking at apartments I could afford if the money kept coming. I pictured quiet rooms and locks I controlled. I stopped inviting friends over. I did not want questions. I slept with my phone on the bed. I flinched when it buzzed. I took better photos. I wiped the lens. I checked the background. I erased reflections. There were other requests that made less sense. My shoes placed heel to heel on tile. The crease behind my knee. My shadow at noon. My shadow at night. A picture of my hands after washing, and again after not washing for a day. I did them all. The money kept coming. The exit I wanted felt closer. I told myself it was a trade, not a trap. One night she sent a file without warning. It was not a picture she wanted. It was one she had taken. It showed the back of my car in a lot I used when I went for late drives to calm down. The angle was from a height, maybe a stairwell. The plate was blurred, but I recognized the dent on the bumper. The message that followed said nothing. A payment arrived anyway. I told myself she had guessed, that lots of cars looked the same, that fear was inventing meaning. I did not reply. The next meeting was cancelled without comment. After that, the requests grew precise. The inside of my left shoe, the callus on my right foot, the mole on my shoulder measured against a coin, the hinge of my jaw while I yawned. The space between my fingers spread wide. She never asked for my face. That should have been a relief. It was not. It felt like she did not need it. I began to see my life as a set of angles. I checked windows before turning lights on. I parked farther away. I walked different routes. I deleted photos after sending them, then emptied the trash. I told myself these habits were normal caution. I did not tell anyone because saying it would make it real. The last message arrived on a humid night when the air would not move. It came without a request. It was a photo of my childhood home taken from across the street. The porch light was on. The curtains were half open the way my mother always left them. My father's car sat at the curb in the same spot he favored. The angle showed the cracked sidewalk and the maple tree with the low branch I used to climb. The timestamp matched the present minute. There was no text. There was no payment. I sat on my bed and felt my chest lock up. I understood then what the photos had been for. They were not about desire. They were about confirmation. Hands matched doors. Shoes matched tracks. Mouths matched teeth. Dirt matched yards. Shadows matched habits. She had built a file that could find me anywhere. The places we met made sense now. They were training grounds. They taught me to show up where no one else was, and to think that was normal. I never responded again. I did not block the number. I powered the phone down and removed the battery. I packed what I could carry and left before dawn. I drove until the light changed color and the roads filled with people who had their own reasons for being awake. I stayed with a friend for a week, and then another. I paid cash. I did not use my name where I could avoid it. I changed my routines and kept changing them. Months passed without contact. No messages. No money. I did not relax. I assumed absence was another tool. I filed a report with local police using facts only. I showed them the photo of my house. They took notes. They said there was not much to do without a threat or a face. They advised me to be careful. I already was. The explanation settled slowly and fully. She had not been helping me leave. She had been mapping me. The money was bait that kept me still long enough to measure. The late hours reduced witnesses. The empty places reduced noise. The photos built certainty. When she finally showed me the house, it was not a threat in words. It was proof of access. It was a test to see if I would answer. I passed the test by refusing it. The cost was high. I lost the apartment I planned for. I lost sleep for a year. I lost the ease of trusting offers that sound kind. I gained a rule that has kept me alive since. No help that asks for pieces of you is help. It is inventory. I won't say my name because this happened recently and the town is small. It was 2023, and I was living out of my van along a stretch of coast that doesn't make postcards. The cliffs were low and crumbly. The beach was narrow. The water looked clean from a distance, but carried silt that stained the foam brown. I came there because the breaks were inconsistent. I liked places where you had to pay attention. I parked above the beach on a gravel pull-off cut into the bluff. At night the wind rattled the panels and salt crusted the windows by morning. I met her because she was always there before sunrise. I would be waxing my board or checking the tide chart on my phone, and I would see her on the cliffs, standing where the ground sloped toward the edge. She never wore the same clothes twice in a row, but the colors stayed muted. Gray, dull blue, brown. She never had a bag. She never came down to the sand. She stood still with her hands at her sides, facing the water. The first week I assumed she was counting waves or watching birds. Locals watch the ocean like that. I noticed her watching me because she didn't watch anyone else. A few other surfers came through, mostly weekend people. She didn't turn her head when they passed. When I walked my board down, she tracked me the whole way. I could feel it without looking. When I did look, her gaze didn't shift or soften. It felt measured, like timing a set. She never got in the water. I watched the mornings when the swell was clean and the wind was right. She stayed dry. Her shoes never touched sand. She left no footprints near the path. She arrived before me and left after I was already paddling out. When I came back, she was gone. The first time she approached me was after a long session when my shoulders burned and my lips tasted like salt. I was rinsing my leash with a jug of water when she stood beside the van. I hadn't heard her walk up. She didn't startle me. It felt like she had always been there, and my brain had just caught up. She pointed at a crack in my windshield and then at the duct tape holding my side mirror. She pulled out a phone and showed me a banking app screen with a transfer queued. She indicated my board, then the road, then the water. Her face stayed flat. She moved with intention, like someone checking items off a list. I didn't say anything. I nodded because that was easier than asking why. I assumed she was rich and bored. Coastal towns collect people like that. The money hit my account that afternoon. Enough to replace fins I'd been putting off and to fix the mirror properly. I told myself it was patronage. Some people fund art. Some people fund waves. After that, she paid regularly. Not on a schedule that matched rent or bills, but tied to mornings. If I surfed the North Break at first light, money came through by noon. If I went out at the South Cove when the tide was rising, there was a smaller transfer later. She never explained. I kept a note on my phone. Times, breaks, swell height, wind. The amounts lined up with patterns I didn't fully see. She liked repetition. I figured she was studying something. People study tides and bodies. Maybe she was building a model. She started paying for repairs without being asked. New brake pads. A patch on the roof seam. Groceries dropped off at the door of the van while I was in the water. I would come back and find the bags lined up neatly, labels facing out. Nothing expired. No junk. She had watched me long enough to know what I ate. The watching never stopped. Some mornings the cliffs were empty, and I still felt it. The feeling had weight. It pressed between my shoulder blades when I paddled out. It didn't fade when I reached the lineup. It stayed even when fog rolled in and erased the shore. I told myself it was habit. Surfers get superstitious. We read the water too hard and start reading everything else. The water started behaving wrong. That's the only way I can say it without sounding dramatic. The sets came in uneven pulses that didn't match the forecast. Rip currents formed where there hadn't been any. The pull felt heavier, like the water had more mass. I had to work harder to hold position. One morning I got dragged sideways across the break in a way that didn't line up with the swell direction. I checked the charts later. They said everything was normal. Once, far from shore, something brushed my ankle. Not a bump like kelp. Not a clean strike like a fish. It slid deliberate, then let go. I kicked hard and scanned the surface. Nothing broke the water. I got back on my board and paddled in without finishing the session. I told myself it was a seal or debris. The ocean is full of both. Still, I didn't shake the feeling that it had waited. She sent me maps with circles drawn on them. No words. Just locations and times implied by the sun's position in the screenshots. She wanted me out during slack tide, then during outgoing, then incoming again, cycling through the same spots. She never asked for storms at first. She avoided them. The money came steadily. My van ran better than it ever had. I stayed because it felt managed. I knew where to be and when. That kind of structure can feel like safety. I started noticing small changes around the parking area. The gravel shifted overnight. New tire tracks appeared and vanished. The wooden post marking the edge of the bluff leaned a little more each week. Someone moved my wheel chocks closer to the tires without telling me. I assumed kids. The town had bored teenagers. I started setting the parking brake harder. She watched even when she wasn't there. That sounds wrong, but it's the best description. The cliffs became a presence. The ocean became a clock. I adjusted my sleep to catch the right light. I ate when the money came through, not when I was hungry. I stopped checking messages from friends because they felt off rhythm. The first storm she wanted was late summer. The swell was stacked. The wind was wrong. The sky had that metallic look that presses down on your ears. She sent the location anyway, same break, same early hour. I checked the water from the sand. The pull was visible. Foam streaked out to sea in long lines. The kind of day locals skip. I didn't go. I sat in the van and watched the rain bead on the windshield. I waited for the transfer that didn't come. By evening, my account balance hadn't changed. That night I slept light. The wind rocked the van. The tide was higher than usual, pushed by the storm. I woke to movement. Not the usual sway. A rolling sensation, slow and heavy. The van lurched forward. The sound changed from gravel to something hollow. I grabbed the wheel and slammed the brake. It didn't catch. The van kept rolling. The door flew open when it hit the slope. Cold water rushed in fast, shockingly fast. The smell of salt filled the space. The headlights went dark. I crawled out through the open door and into the water up to my chest. The current tugged at my legs. I slipped and went under, came up choking. I clawed my way toward the rocks and found purchase on a ledge slick with algae. I stayed there, shaking, until the van settled and the tide pinned it. By morning it was half submerged, nose down, waves slapping the hood. The investigation was brief. The officer noted the storm, the slope, the worn brake cable. He said gravity and weather do things. The town had seen worse. Insurance covered some of it. The rest was a loss. I slept in a borrowed room and tried to get my head straight. The explanation came together because I stopped looking at her as a mystery and started looking at her as a planner. The payments lined up with tide tables and storm surges. The brakes she chose sat above culverts and drains that altered flow when rain came. The parking spot above the beach drained into a channel that undercut the gravel during high water. Someone had loosened the parking brake adjustment weeks before. The wheel chocks had been placed to look helpful while keeping the tires on the edge of the weakened ground. She had waited for the night when the tide would be highest and the storm would push it farther. Timing mattered more than force. I checked my phone once it was dry enough to power on. There was a message sent after the van went in. It contained a single word that matched everything I had missed. I left the town the next day with a ride from someone who didn't ask questions. I stopped surfing for a while. When I think about that coast now, I don't think about monsters or curses. I think about someone who loved patterns and wanted to see if a person could be placed into one as cleanly as a wave into a chart. I was a variable that refused a data point. The system corrected. We were headed west in late September 2019, chasing the idea that if we kept driving long enough the money problem would solve itself. Trevor and I had planned the trip badly. We spent too much early, trusted that small towns would be cheaper, and underestimated how far Arizona stretched when you were watching the fuel gauge sink. By the time we hit the high desert east of Flagstaff, the sky had gone pale and hard, the kind of blue that looks thin, and our remaining cash sat folded and counted in the center console like something fragile. We pulled off I-40 because the car needed rest as much as we did. The roadside exit was quiet in a way that felt deliberate, like sound avoided the place. A few darkened buildings sat back from the road, low and spread out, and the motel sign buzzed without fully lighting. I remember the smell first, hot dust and old oil, and something sour that clung to the back of the throat. We sat in the car with the engine ticking as it cooled, neither of us wanting to say out loud that we could not afford even one room. She appeared in the lot without warning. One moment there was nothing beyond the car's reflection in the motel office window, and then she was there, leaning against the trunk of a sedan parked 2 spaces down. She did not approach us together. She waited until Trevor stepped away toward the vending machine and then crossed the lot toward me. Her shoes made no sound on the gravel. She wore jeans that looked new and a jacket that did not match the weather. Her hair was neat, her face calm, and there was nothing rushed about her movements. She made an offer that felt rehearsed without sounding practiced. She had money. She wanted company. Not sex. Just dinners, rides, conversation. It was presented as an exchange, clean and reasonable, as if she were buying time rather than people. I remember how carefully she avoided touching me, how she kept a polite distance that made it harder to label her as a threat. When Trevor came back, she did the same thing again, separately, like she wanted 2 individual decisions instead of one shared one. We talked it through in the car after she walked away. The desert light was gone by then, the lot lit by sodium lamps that flattened everything. We told ourselves it was strange but harmless. We told ourselves that adults were allowed to make weird deals. We told ourselves that people with bad intentions did not bother clarifying boundaries. Mostly, we told ourselves we were tired and broke and needed sleep. She paid for the motel at the office without letting either of us step inside. She handled the clerk herself. When she came back, she handed us keys and insisted we take separate rooms. She framed it as a courtesy, as space, as something she thought we would prefer. The way she said it made refusing feel rude. Trevor shrugged and took his key. I took mine. We parked the car where she pointed, beneath a light that flickered but did not go out. My room smelled like bleach layered over damp carpet. The air conditioner rattled when I turned it on, so I shut it off and opened the window a crack instead. Outside, the highway whispered without pause. I sat on the edge of the bed and tried to slow my breathing. I checked my phone and saw that I had no missed calls, no messages. I told myself that the unease I felt was just the unfamiliar, the consequence of sleeping somewhere that did not belong to me. I lay down fully clothed and watched the ceiling fan trace uneven circles. The minutes slid past without shape. Every sound felt amplified, the ice machine coughing down the row, a door opening somewhere, the distant bark of a dog that might have been miles away. At some point, I drifted into a shallow sleep that broke apart at the slightest noise. Just before 2 a.m, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a message from Trevor, sent with urgency. He wanted to know if I was outside his door. The words sat there bright against the dark, and my stomach dropped as if the floor had tilted. I was in my room alone, the deadbolt turned. I had not moved. I typed back with shaking fingers, telling him I was not there. The response came almost immediately. He said someone had been standing on the other side of his door for a long time. He said he could hear breathing, close and slow, like someone leaning in. He said it had been happening for 10 minutes. I got out of bed and stood with my ear against my own door, listening to the hollow quiet of the exterior walkway. I heard nothing. No footsteps, no voices, no breath. The light outside my window buzzed and then steadied. I considered calling the front desk, and then remembered there was no desk after hours, just a bell and a number taped to the glass. I considered calling the police and imagined trying to explain why we were there, why a stranger had paid for our rooms, why nothing had actually happened yet. I told Trevor to stay inside, to keep the deadbolt locked, to call if anything changed. I sat on my bed with my shoes on and my phone in my hand until my wrist ached. Time stretched and warped. Every few minutes I checked the door again. Nothing came. The silence felt deliberate, as if it were being maintained. I must have slept again without realizing it. The next thing I knew, pale light was creeping under the curtains, turning the room gray. My phone lay face down on the bed, dark. There were no new messages. I stepped outside into cold morning air and walked the short distance to Trevor's room. His door was closed. I knocked once, then again, harder. There was no answer. I tried the handle. It turned. The door swung inward. The room was empty. The bedspread was pulled back on one side, rumpled as if someone had sat there. Trevor's wallet lay open on the bed, cards neatly aligned. His phone was gone. His shoes were gone. The bathroom light was off. There were no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. The window was locked. The air in the room felt still, untouched. I stood there longer than made sense, waiting for him to step out from the bathroom, to laugh, to tell me I was overreacting. That did not happen. The only sound was the hum of the ice machine at the end of the building. I went back to the car on instinct. I needed something solid. On the windshield, tucked under the wiper, was a plain white envelope. Inside was cash, folded once, enough to fill the gas tank, and then some. No note. No name. On the dashboard, the dust had been disturbed as if someone had leaned in through the open door and then wiped their hand clean. I searched the lot, the surrounding scrub, the stretch of road that disappeared toward the interstate. There were tire tracks everywhere, and none that mattered. The clerk had not arrived yet. The office door was locked. I sat in the driver's seat and tried to make the world arrange itself into something that made sense. I did not call the police. The reasons felt clear in the moment and flimsy later. I did not know how to explain her. I did not know her real name. I did not know where she came from or where she went. I did not know how to say that we had agreed to something that felt harmless and ended in a room without my friend in it. I was afraid of the questions that would follow, of the way suspicion would spread backward until it landed on us. I drove away alone. The highway opened up and swallowed the motel in my mirrors. The cash sat heavy in my pocket. Every mile felt like a theft. I kept expecting my phone to buzz, to see Trevor's name light the screen, to hear his voice in my head. That did not happen. In the days that followed, I replayed the details with a precision that bordered on obsession. The way she approached us separately, the insistence on separate rooms, the breathing at the door that never left a trace, the wallet placed carefully on the bed, the phone taken, the money left to ensure I did not stay. Each piece fit together into a picture I did not want to see. It was not chance. It was selection. She had watched us before she spoke to us, measured our fatigue, our lack of options. The offer was structured to feel voluntary, to make us complicit in our own vulnerability. Separate rooms meant isolation. Breathing at the door meant pressure without proof, fear without witnesses. Taking the phone cut off help. Leaving the wallet removed the urgency of theft and made the disappearance look like a choice. Leaving me money ensured distance, speed, silence. I read about similar cases later, about people who vanished along highways, about intermediaries who worked clean and quiet, about how the absence of violence was itself a tactic. There were patterns that matched too well to ignore. I recognized the calm. I recognized the care. I did eventually speak to someone, not the police, not at first. I told Trevor's sister everything I knew. It was not much. It was not enough. A report was filed without my involvement. Nothing came of it. There were no cameras at the motel that worked. The clerk remembered a woman, but could not describe her beyond ordinary. The trail ended where the desert began. I have not driven that stretch of I-40 since. I avoid roadside motels with flickering signs. I lock my doors and keep my phone charged. None of it feels like penance. It feels like survival learned too late. The ending is not mysterious. It is mundane and ugly. A person saw two tired men with no money and made a calculation. One was taken. One was left with just enough to go home and carry the weight of knowing how easily it happened. I was 20 in 2016, and my life was small in a way that felt permanent. I worked construction with a crew that changed every few months, lived in a basement room that smelled like damp concrete, and counted hours instead of days. My body hurt in predictable places. My thoughts stayed narrow. When she found me, it felt accidental, like most bad decisions do when they start. She owned land outside a rural town in Ontario, far enough that the road thinned into gravel and then dirt. I had been working on a small renovation job for a neighbor of hers. She watched from a distance at first, always from the edge of the property line, never stepping onto the site. She dressed neatly, even outdoors, and carried herself like someone used to being listened to. Later I learned the money came from family. Old money that never needed explaining. She paid me well, enough that it felt irresponsible to say no. She asked me to quit my job and help her around her property instead. Maintenance, clearing brush, fixing fences, keeping paths open. She said she liked keeping things local. The way she said it made it sound thoughtful, like supporting the area, but there was something else under it. Something possessive. I moved into a small guest house near the main residence. It had power, running water, and a bed that didn't creak. The forest pressed in from all sides. There were no nearby houses, no visible neighbors, no traffic noise. At night, the dark felt heavy. Not threatening, just thick. She had rules. They were given early, quietly, and never repeated. I wasn't supposed to use my phone outside. She said it interfered with the land. Not the signal. The land. Inside was fine, as long as I stayed near the windows. She didn't like screens near the trees. I didn't argue. I didn't need to. The pay made the rules feel reasonable. Work started early. The property was massive, larger than it looked on maps. Trails cut through the forest in uneven lines, some maintained, some left to close in. My tasks were specific. Clear this path. Stack wood there. Leave certain areas alone. She marked those with small wooden stakes painted white. No explanation was offered. I stayed away. The first time I noticed the stone markers was during brush clearing. They were set deep in the woods, not near any obvious border. Each one stood about waist high, rough and irregular, like they had been pulled from the ground nearby and set upright without shaping. Moss covered most of their surfaces. Lichen traced pale lines across the tops. They weren't evenly spaced. They didn't form a straight line. They felt older than the property, older than any survey. I reported them at the end of the day, expecting instructions to remove them or work around them. She reacted strongly, though still without raising her voice. The air changed. Her posture tightened. She told me they were boundaries. That was all. The word landed hard. I asked boundaries of what? She didn't answer. The next morning, the area was added to the list of places I was not to enter. Over time, I learned the shape of the land through repetition. The sound of my boots on dirt and pine needles became familiar. The forest had layers. New growth close to the house. Older trees farther out. Fallen logs left to rot. Clearings that felt accidental, like pauses in a sentence. There were places where the air felt cooler, even on warm days. I told myself it was shade and moisture. I told myself everything had an explanation. She watched my movements more closely than I realized at first. I thought she stayed near the house, reading or walking the garden paths. Later, I noticed signs that didn't fit that picture. Footprints where no one should have been. Branches snapped recently in areas I had cleared days before. The sense that I was being tracked, not in a dramatic way, but in the quiet way of someone who already knows where you will be. One afternoon, I walked past one of the stone markers without meaning to. The path had narrowed, and I stepped off to avoid a fallen branch. My boot crossed an invisible line. Nothing happened. No sound. No shift. I realized what I had done only when I saw the stone at my side. I stepped back immediately and finished the day without incident. That night, she woke me up. There was no conversation. No questions spoken out loud. The sound of her moving through the guest house was enough. Fast steps. Uneven breathing. She turned on lights without warning. Her hands shook. She kept pointing at the forest, then at me, then at the floor, as if mapping something invisible. She was asking where I'd gone. Not verbally. Physically. Her panic was real. Not staged. That frightened me more than anger would have. After that, the rules tightened. My work areas shrank. She asked for written notes at the end of each day, detailing where I had been. Times. Directions. Distances. I complied. It felt easier than pushing back. I told myself it was eccentricity, not danger. Wealth does strange things to people who never need to hear no. The forest changed as summer faded. Leaves thickened on the ground. The air grew sharp. Animals became more visible, then less. I started noticing bones near the edges of clearings. At first, single pieces. A rib. A jaw. Nothing unusual in a forest that large. Then patterns appeared. Near the tree line, away from the paths, I found circles. Carefully arranged. Bones placed end to end, forming rough rings. Some were small, likely from deer or smaller mammals. Others were thicker, longer, wrong in proportion. The circles were not old. The moss hadn't had time to grow. The placement was deliberate. Balanced. I didn't tell her. I didn't know why at first. Later, I realized I was afraid of what she would do if she knew I had seen them. Instead, I began to pay closer attention. I mapped the circles in my head. There were more than I initially thought. Some had been disturbed recently. Footprints nearby. Her shoe size was small. The prints matched. Sleep became shallow. Every sound carried weight. I started keeping my phone charged and hidden, even though I didn't use it outside. The isolation pressed in. Days passed without any contact beyond her presence. No visitors. No deliveries. She handled supplies herself, driving into town early and returning before noon. I found records in a shed one morning while looking for tools. Old notebooks. Property maps. Hand-drawn lines tracing the forest. The stone markers were marked clearly, each one numbered. Dates filled the margins. Revisions. Notes about movement, containment, maintenance. It read like land management, but the language was personal, emotional, possessive. The bones were explained in the same way. Animal control, pest reduction, balance. But the quantities didn't add up. Neither did the care taken in arrangement. This wasn't disposal. It was display. I made my decision slowly. I didn't announce it. I didn't pack openly. I waited for a day when she left the property longer than usual. I loaded my truck with what I could carry and drove out along the dirt road without looking back. She didn't try to stop me. She didn't follow. That silence stayed with me. Months later, after settling into a new job in another town, I looked up the property. Public records showed a history of boundary disputes. Complaints from previous workers. Nothing criminal. Nothing actionable. Just patterns. People leaving abruptly. Equipment abandoned. Trails closing in where access had once been maintained. The bones were never reported. Neither were the markers. The land remained hers. Contained. Maintained. I understood then what she meant by keeping things local. She wasn't protecting the town. She was protecting the shape of her world. Everyone within it had a place. Lines were drawn. Crossing them had consequences. Not supernatural. Not hidden. Just enforced by money, isolation, and fear. I don't think she harmed anyone directly. I think she arranged things so that harm never needed to be obvious. People removed themselves. Animals filled the spaces left behind. The forest didn't need her rules. She needed them. and she needed someone else to believe in them long enough to keep them standing. March 2020 pressed down on Milan like a lid. The city went quiet in a way that felt staged, as if someone had pulled sound out by hand. I had arrived 2 weeks earlier for a fashion internship that collapsed in a single email. The office shut before I ever stepped inside. Flights vanished. Borders hardened. Hotels refused new guests. I slept on a borrowed couch until the host left the city. Then I slept alone, listening to sirens echo through streets I could not name. I posted a single photo on Instagram from the balcony of the sublet. It was gray light, my face half turned, buildings stacked behind me like concrete ribs. I had not posted in months. I did not tag anything. I wanted proof I still existed. That night a message appeared from an account with no posts and a private profile. She followed designers, casting agents, photographers. The message said she admired my face. It said there was something calm about how I held myself. It said stillness was rare. I did not reply. The next morning another message appeared. It said she had contacts. It said she hated seeing talent stranded. It said Milan was dangerous right now and she could help. I checked the account again. It followed people I recognized from internship emails. I searched the name attached to the profile. It existed. It led to a small agency page with a phone number and a single press clipping from years earlier. Nothing looked fake. I replied. Within hours money arrived through a transfer service. Enough to cover a month of rent. She sent a list of addresses. I chose an apartment near Porta Venezia because it was small and clean and empty. Groceries began arriving the next day. Bottled water, fresh bread, fruit wrapped in thin paper. Everything precise. She said it was better if I stayed inside. She said the virus was worse than reported. She said police were stopping people at random. I believed her because fear was already sitting in my chest, and she spoke directly to it. The apartment was on the 4th floor. The building was old, with a narrow stairwell and a slow elevator that smelled like metal and cleaning fluid. From the windows I could see a courtyard and the opposite building's balconies. People leaned out in the afternoons. Someone played music. A woman shook a rug. Life went on, thin but visible. I stayed inside. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was responsible. She sent instructions without asking questions. Sleep schedule. Light exercise near the window. Skincare products delivered without explanation. A tripod arrived. A backdrop. She asked for daily photos at the same time. Front-facing. Neutral expression. Hair back. No makeup. The requests felt professional. I complied because I needed the money and because the city outside felt like a risk I could not measure. The voice notes began in the second week. They arrived late, after midnight. They were short. No words. Just breathing. Slow, controlled. Close to the microphone. At first I assumed it was an accident. A recording sent by mistake. I did not respond. The next night another arrived, longer. The breathing had a rhythm that made my own chest tighten. Under it there was another sound. A low movement, steady, like air pushed through branches. It made no sense. There were no trees near the building. The courtyard held stone and parked bikes and a single trash bin. I muted the conversation. She sent money again the next day, more than before. She sent a delivery of protein bars and vitamins. She sent instructions for posture. She sent another voice note. I listened once. The sound underneath was clearer. Not mechanical. Not traffic. It had pauses, as if something passed in front of it. I imagined an open window somewhere far away. I told myself it was nothing. By the third week the apartment felt smaller. The air felt handled. I noticed the camera lens on the tripod had a faint fingerprint on it that was not mine. I cleaned it. I began to see patterns where there were none. I counted the steps from the bed to the door. I watched the neighbors more closely. They came and went. They wore masks. They spoke to each other across balconies. I realized I was the only one who never left. I tried to step outside once. I put on my coat and reached for the handle. My phone vibrated. A message arrived reminding me to stay inside. It said it was not safe yet. I froze with my hand on the metal. I stepped back. I told myself it was coincidence. I told myself she was watching the news. The deliveries continued. They arrived at exact times, always placed neatly against the door. Once I waited, pressed my ear to the wood. I heard nothing in the hall. No footsteps. No elevator. When I opened the door, the bag was there, handles upright, receipt folded on top. I closed the door and locked it. Sleep thinned. I lay awake listening to the building. Pipes. Distant sirens. Sometimes the low sound returned, not from my phone but from the walls, or so it felt. I checked the windows. Closed. The sound faded when I focused on it. I stopped listening to the voice notes. They kept coming. The file lengths increased. The breathing stayed steady. The undercurrent sounded closer, like air moving across a narrow space. I stopped replying entirely. The money still arrived. The groceries still came. Then, one evening, a notification appeared with a video attachment. It loaded slowly. The image was the hallway outside my apartment. My door filled the frame. The light flickered. The camera angle was low, as if placed near the floor. The video was marked live. I watched my own door from the other side. I watched the handle. Nothing moved. The feed lasted 3 minutes. It ended without a message. I sat on the floor with my back against the bed. My heart did not race. It slowed. Something settled into place. The help had never been distant. The care had never been abstract. She knew the building. She knew the floor. She knew the door. I checked the locks. Solid. I packed without turning on lights. Passport. Phone charger. A sweater. Cash left over from the first transfer. I left everything else. I opened the door and listened. The hall was empty. The elevator was too loud. I took the stairs. Each landing smelled the same. At the bottom, the front door stuck for a moment before opening onto the street. Outside, Milan was quiet but alive. A man walked a dog. A delivery scooter passed. The air felt cold and clean. I did not look back. I walked until my legs burned. I reached the station and slept sitting up. In the morning, I contacted the police. I showed them the messages, the transfers, the video. They took notes. They told me to stay with a friend. I had none in the city. They gave me a number to call if anything else happened. Weeks later, after I left Italy on a repatriation flight, an email arrived from a journalist. He was investigating a small agency that had been using lockdown to control models stranded abroad. The owner had access to keys through property managers. She selected faces she felt calm looking at. She kept them inside, isolated, fed, watched. The breathing recordings were taken from a countryside property she owned, where she recorded herself walking at night to calm anxiety. The sound underneath was wind through trees. The police later confirmed she had installed cameras in hallways with borrowed access. She was charged with stalking and unlawful surveillance. The case did not go to trial quickly. It did not need to for me. The explanation closed the space the fear had occupied. What happened was not mysterious. It was methodical. It relied on fear already present and offered safety with conditions. When I think about that apartment now, I remember the light on the wall at dusk and the way stillness can be mistaken for calm. I took the offer in August 2021 because it sounded temporary and clean. The heat in the hill country pressed down like a hand. The ranch sat past a cattle gate and a long limestone drive that erased cell service. Mesquite and cedar crowded the fence lines. The main house stood white and wide on a rise, and the guest house waited downhill near a stock tank gone low and green. No neighbors showed anywhere. The quiet felt earned. The woman owned the place outright. That part checked out. Money showed in the roofs, the new fencing, the solar panels, the gravel kept sharp. I moved into the guest house with a duffel and a tool bag, planning to stay a month. The building smelled of new paint and ozone from the window unit. Every window had a camera mounted outside, black domes with no dust. The doors carried sensors that clicked when they seated. I noticed the cameras first because I had installed enough of them to know when someone paid for quality. Inside the main house, a wall of screens ran live feeds. The frames tiled the land from angles I didn't expect. Fence corners, the far pasture, the road past the gate, the guest house porch from two sides. The feeds rolled day and night without interruption. The screens never went dark. I learned their positions by habit, the way a person learns exits. The routine set fast. I woke early to work on fences, pumps, brush. The sun cooked everything by 10. Cicadas rattled until the air felt full of gravel. At dusk, wind slid through cedar and carried dust into the light. At night, the land went flat and heavy. The stars burned clean. Coyotes cut across the draws and shut up as soon as I turned my head. The cameras tracked more than safety. They tracked me. I learned that by accident. I took a path I hadn't used and saw my own movement play back later from a new angle. The framing adjusted when I crossed certain points. I felt counted. The feeling stuck even when I was alone. I slept light. The fence line marked a hard border. Beyond it, the land dropped into rough brush and limestone shelves. Something moved out there after dark. The sound carried weight and patience. It wasn't quick like deer. It wasn't chaotic like hogs tearing a feeder. It moved steady, as if it knew the ground by heart. The fence hummed once, not from touch, but from pressure nearby. The cameras caught shadows sliding across grass with no rush. I watched the screens more than I should have. Days passed without trouble. Food arrived in bulk and kept cold. Fuel stayed topped off. The truck ran fine. The work list never ended. I felt useful. The quiet worked on me. The woman stayed in the main house and never crossed paths by accident. The screens showed her sometimes, moving room to room, stopping to watch. Her presence felt constant without being close. I felt watched without being addressed. The night sounds grew closer. Not closer to the house, closer to the fence. The same route, the same timing. The fence stayed intact. The ground outside showed prints that told a simple story. Heavy animal. Cloven hooves. Feral cattle had wandered in from somewhere, gone wild. Their mass explained the sound. Their patience explained the pace. The cameras never zoomed on them. The feeds framed the fence instead. I tested limits. I walked the fence at night with a headlamp off, counting steps. The screens showed my path in clean rectangles of light that tracked even without my lamp. Motion triggered without delay. The land inside the fence felt claimed. Outside felt ignored. I started planning my exit. The work was done enough. The quiet stopped feeling earned. I packed during the heat of the afternoon. The truck loaded without issue. The gate opened smooth. No alarms sounded. The screens in the main house showed my departure from 3 angles. The woman stood still on one feed and watched. She didn't move to block anything. The gate closed behind me without hesitation. 3 miles down the road, the truck died. Not sputter. Not gradual loss. Full cut. The dash went dark. I coasted onto the caliche shoulder and stopped. The heat rolled in through the open windows. The phone showed no service. I popped the hood. The battery cables were clean and tight. The fuel line sat where it should. The ignition relay was missing. Not loose. Missing. The space held fresh marks, as if a part had been lifted with care. I walked back toward the ranch with the sun sinking and my back wet. The road bent through low brush and limestone cuts. I didn't make it far before the sound started beyond the fence line that paralleled the road. Heavy steps matched my pace. When I stopped, the steps stopped. When I walked, they resumed. The fence between us stayed untested. The cameras were mounted along the stretch too. Their lenses angled inward, not out. I reached the gate at dusk. It stood closed. The keypad blinked. I didn't have the code. The road behind me held no traffic. The land felt sealed. The sound beyond the fence moved ahead of me now, pacing the gate, then falling back. The animal never showed itself. It didn't need to. I turned back to the truck and worked until dark. I stripped wire, bridged circuits, tried every trick I knew. The relay wasn't there to trick. The part had been taken for a reason. I slept in the cab with the windows cracked and woke to the smell of cattle and dust. Hoof marks ringed the shoulder but never crossed it. The fence line carried a clean path where bodies had passed. The cameras blinked red in the dark. Morning brought heat and clarity. The ranch controlled the road through access and surveillance. The missing relay proved intent. The animals explained pressure without contact. The cameras explained certainty. The woman never needed to stop me. The land inside the fence did the work. I walked the road at first light, not toward the ranch, but away. The fence followed for a mile, then broke at a culvert. The cameras stopped there. The land opened. The sounds faded. I cut cross-country, took scratches, drank warm water, and reached a county road by noon. A truck passed and slowed. I got a ride to town without speaking. I reported nothing that could be dismissed. I replaced the relay and drove on. I didn't go back. I learned later through public records what the ranch was built for. Private security testing, behavioral mapping, animal pressure without injury, surveillance without confrontation, consent obtained by contract fine print. The land recognized me because it had already recorded me. I wouldn't last without her because the exit had been designed to fail. The cameras watched me leave and made sure I came back. When I didn't, the system let me go. My name is Lewis. In October 2022, I worked nights at a warehouse near Trafford Park. My shift ended at 3 in the morning. I took the same tram home every night because the roads were quiet and the carriages were empty. I liked the calm after hours of noise and fluorescent light. She was waiting outside the stop the first night I noticed her. She stood under the shelter where the glass was cracked, hands folded, looking straight ahead. She did not look surprised to see me. The timing felt planned. I assumed she lived nearby and kept odd hours. I did not think more about it. She began to appear often. Not every night, but enough that it felt deliberate. Always alone. Always standing still. She watched the tracks, not the road. She wore the same long coat, dark and heavy, even when the weather was mild. I worked with my hands and carried the marks of it. She noticed that. She told me she liked that type of man. She said it without warmth. It sounded like a rule she had learned. I needed a place to stay. My previous room had flooded after a pipe burst, and the landlord dragged his feet. I was sleeping on a friend's sofa and running out of patience. When she said she had a spare room, it felt like luck. No contract. Cash each week. She said she did not believe in paperwork. I told myself that people who worked nights did things differently. Her house was in a quiet part of Manchester, a row of old terraces set back from the main road. The brick was dark with age. The front step dipped in the middle from years of use. Inside, the air smelled of damp carpet and something metallic, like old coins rubbed together. The hallway was narrow and the light was dim. The walls were bare except for faint rectangles where pictures had once hung. She showed me the room at the top of the stairs. The bed was narrow. The wardrobe door scraped the floor when opened. There was no lock on the door. She said locks showed mistrust. She said people who trusted each other slept better. I agreed because I needed the room. She told me not to enter certain rooms. She pointed them out without explanation. One was at the end of the hall on the second floor. Another was a small door under the stairs. She said they were storage and unsafe. I accepted it. People had odd rules. I kept to my room and the shared spaces. I settled into a routine. Work at night, sleep during the day. I noticed she never slept. I never saw her bedroom light turn off. Sometimes when I came home, she stood in the kitchen at 4 in the morning. The light would be on. She would be still, facing the back door, listening. Not eating. Not moving. Just listening. I told myself she was alert because she lived alone and had learned caution. At night I heard movement. It came from the rooms I was told not to enter. Slow sounds. Shifts of weight. Something being dragged a short distance, and then stopped. Pipes creak in old houses, I reminded myself. Wood settles. Rats move. I tried to believe it. The house had a way of holding sound. My footsteps echoed too loudly. The stairs groaned no matter how lightly I stepped. I began to notice marks on the walls, shallow scratches at waist height, hidden behind furniture. The carpets were worn thin in narrow paths, as if people had walked the same route many times without straying. She watched my habits. She knew when I left and returned. She knew when I showered. She knew when I ate. She commented on small changes, like a late shift or a missed meal. I told myself it was because she was always awake. I did not ask how she knew. She never invited anyone over. No friends. No family. No deliveries except food, and those were left on the step. The bins were always heavy. I took them out once and felt the weight pull my shoulder. Inside were layers of bagged waste. The smell cut through the plastic. I did not look too closely. Weeks passed. My sleep grew thin. The movement at night became more regular. It followed a pattern. Short sounds between 3 and 5 in the morning. Then quiet. I began to wake before my alarm, heart already racing, as if my body expected something. One afternoon, I noticed the boiler cupboard was warm. The boiler sat in a narrow space off the kitchen. Behind it, the wall had been altered. A panel had been fitted, painted to match, but the edges were rough. Curiosity took hold. I waited until she was out. I never knew where she went, but she left sometimes during the day. Behind the boiler panel was a notebook. It was thick and worn. The cover was plain. Inside were dates going back 20 years. Names. Ages. Short notes written in the same hand. Some entries were neat. Others were rushed. Many ended without explanation, as if the writer had been interrupted. The last page held my name, my age, a few observations about my work hours and habits, written in pencil, not ink. I closed the notebook and put it back. My hands shook. The sounds at night made sense now. The locked rooms were not storage. The listening in the kitchen was not caution. It was waiting. I planned my exit. I did not pack openly. I moved small things into my bag over several days. I kept my routine. I smiled when I had to. I avoided her gaze. I slept lightly and kept my door closed even without a lock. On the night I left, the movement was louder. It came closer. I stayed in bed until the house fell quiet. I left at dawn, carrying my bag, moving slowly down the stairs. The front door opened without a sound. Outside, the air felt sharp and clean. I did not go back. I stayed with a friend across the city. I reported what I found. The police searched the house. They found evidence that matched the notebook. They found the reason for the weight of the bins. They found why no one ever slept there. The ending was not mysterious. It was documented. She had targeted men with fixed schedules and few ties. She kept records. She controlled access. She listened at night to make sure her house stayed quiet. My name was in pencil because I had not stayed long enough. I was meant to be another line finished in ink. I drove up the narrow dirt path in late October, the trees on either side shedding their leaves in thick, wet layers that stuck to the tires of my car. The air was thin and cold, carrying the smell of damp earth and pine. I had been hesitant about coming at all, but she had insisted, said I needed solitude and guidance, and that the mountains would give me both. Her cabin sat on a small clearing halfway up the slope, built from dark, aged timber that blended almost seamlessly with the forest behind it. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, though no one met me when I arrived. She had left a note on the door, neatly folded, with instructions for dinner and where to find the woodpile. I unpacked quickly, leaving the car unlocked as she had instructed, and settled in for the first night. The cabin smelled faintly of cedar and wood smoke, with a lingering hint of something sweet I couldn't place. It was sparsely furnished, almost ascetic, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows. I ate the small provisions she had left, feeling an odd mix of anxiety and relief that the solitude had arrived without incident. Outside, the forest was quiet, the only sound the occasional crack of a branch under some unseen animal's weight. I went to bed early, lying awake at first, listening to the wind threading through the pine needles and the far-off murmur of a creek that I hadn't noticed from the path. The darkness was almost total once my eyes adjusted, and I slept in the heavy silence that only a remote mountain cabin can produce. The second night, I woke to a snapping sound. At first, I assumed it was my imagination, a branch falling or an animal moving near the cabin. But then I heard it again, slow and deliberate, as though someone were stepping carefully through the underbrush. I rose quietly, pressing my hands against the cold glass of the window, peering out into the shadows. There was a figure, hunched and still, moving between the trees. It stayed just beyond the light of the cabin, half hidden behind trunks and branches. I froze, unable to determine whether it was human or an animal. After a long moment, it seemed to retreat into the dark, vanishing as if it had never been there. My heartbeat thundered in my ears. I pulled the curtains closed, telling myself it must be a neighbor, or perhaps someone hiking the trails. I had no way to check, and by morning I was ashamed at how much the encounter had shaken me. On the third night, the snapping returned. I had barely fallen asleep when I heard it outside the bedroom window, followed by a rustling in the leaves. The figure moved again, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin, always keeping just beyond the range of clear sight. I could see it shifting from tree to tree, ducking in and out of the shadows. I stayed motionless, straining to hear anything else, any sound that would identify what I was looking at. The wind shifted and carried a faint metallic smell, like rusted iron or old tools. My stomach tightened. I kept telling myself it was some local, maybe drunk, who wandered the trails at night, but part of me knew that no casual passerby would behave this way. No one would stalk the edges of someone's cabin repeatedly over several hours. By the fourth night, it had become impossible to ignore. I had taken to walking to the outhouse before dusk, hoping to avoid any encounter in the dark, but I soon realized that the figure followed me even then. The forest seemed alive in a way it hadn't before. Every crack, Every sigh of the wind sounded deliberate. I saw the shape between the trees again, hunched, silent, watching me as I moved across the clearing. It never made a sound, never broke stride, but it was always there, always keeping the same distance, never leaving. My stomach nodded. I didn't know whether to run or stay put. The cabin, which had seemed welcoming, now felt like a trap. Every night, I imagined the figure creeping closer, sometimes catching a glimpse of its outline in the corner of my vision, only for it to vanish when I turned to face it directly. I tried to maintain routines to calm myself, stacking firewood, preparing meals, keeping a log of my observations, but even these mundane acts were tainted with the awareness of being watched. Each day, the figure seemed to be closer, leaving the feeling of eyes on me even during daylight. I began double-checking locks, even though the cabin had been unlocked intentionally. I stopped leaving the windows open and kept the curtains drawn tight, though that only heightened the sense of isolation. I could hear birds in the trees, squirrels scampering, the creek murmuring in the distance, and yet, despite these natural sounds, the presence outside remained constant, a silent observer hiding among the autumn shadows. On the fifth night, I could no longer convince myself that the figure was accidental or a coincidence. I left the cabin deliberately, walking down the path toward the car, heart hammering, breath visible in the cold night air. The moment my feet hit the path, I glimpsed it in the periphery, hunched, indistinct, standing behind a tree, perfectly still. It didn't move, didn't react, and yet I knew it had been there all along, waiting. I didn't stop to analyze or understand. I ran down the path, tripping over roots and rocks, nearly falling into the leaves as adrenaline pushed me forward. The figure didn't follow me beyond the edge of the clearing, but the image stayed with me, seared into my mind. I reached the car and drove off without looking back, leaving the cabin, the mountains, and whatever had been lurking in the trees behind me. I didn't return for weeks. When I did hike in other areas of the forest, I kept imagining that shape among the trunks, a shadow that waited just out of sight. It became difficult to distinguish between real life and imagination. I told myself repeatedly that the mountains were quiet, the trails empty, and the figure was a trick of the mind, the product of too much solitude. Yet every time I saw a movement in the trees, every time a branch snapped behind me, my pulse quickened. I began to carry a small flashlight, walking with deliberate awareness of my surroundings, scanning every shadow. Even on sunny days, I felt eyes on me, aware of a presence following, keeping pace at a distance I could not see but always sensed. Months later, I tried to understand what had happened. I read about local wildlife and night hikers, about how shadows and branches can create illusions in the mind. I considered cameras, but I never set any up, too afraid of what I might capture. Sometimes I questioned my memory, thinking that fear had exaggerated simple sights into something sinister. But the unease never left me. Even now, in the safety of my apartment, I pause when I hear footsteps outside the window at night, feeling that same tightening in my chest. The figure, whatever it was, left no evidence, no footprints in the dirt, no broken branches leading away. Yet the imprint of its presence remains, as real as the cold air and rusted leaves I remember from those nights. Looking back, the clarity comes in the realization that the mountain cabin was never the threat. It was the observer, silent and patient, shaping my perception. She had insisted on solitude, but I understand now that it made me vulnerable, sensitive to shapes and movements that I might have ignored in company. The figure took advantage of that solitude, existing just beyond my comfort zone, tangible yet elusive. It was not supernatural. It did not vanish into smoke or dissipate with dawn. It waited steady, following, unseen but deeply felt. The lesson I carried away was the vulnerability inherent in isolation, the awareness that even a human, or something human-like, can exist undetected, patient and unhurried, shaping fear through presence alone. I never returned to that cabin. The path is long, narrow, and easy to forget, and I have avoided it deliberately. Yet I hike other trails, careful, alert, aware. The fear did not vanish, but it became a tool, a reminder that the world holds quiet dangers and that some presences are best left unchallenged. The figure, patient and watching, lives in the memory of those nights, a lesson in vigilance and humility. I learned to respect the stillness of the forest and the subtlety of unseen observers. That was the lasting horror, the understanding that someone, or something, can follow without ever being seen, changing the way you inhabit space, the way you move, the way you breathe, and that this awareness can linger long after you leave the mountains behind. Even now, years later, when I hike and the forest stretches quiet around me, I catch myself imagining the figure. Not threatening anymore, but present, a silent reminder of those October nights, reminding me that solitude in the wrong place, at the wrong time, can be its own form of danger. The horror was never about violence, never about confrontation. It was about being watched, about the patient attention of something or someone whose motives I could never know. And that, in the quiet, remains unforgettable.